And welcome back to the show. SAGE is America's largest and oldest organization dedicated to improving the lives of LGBTQ older adults. SAGE's innovative services and programs actually support thousands of LGBT older adults and individuals in the community as well as around the country. Joining us now, we're pleased to have the site director of SAGE Center Bronx, and we've got Jose Collazo. And Jose, thank you for being with us here on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Dan.
Yeah, and when we talk about, servicing the needs of this particular community, it's been something that's been at the heart for you for many years. Talk to us about the needs and what your organization really does.
Well, SAGE is the oldest and largest LGBT service provider in the country. Our goal is to serve and provide services and advocacy for LGBT older adults. And so when we look at the needs and what we're addressing, we're looking at economic insecurity, food insecurity, housing insecurity. After dealing with the pandemic, we've been dealing also with some of the digital divide that we noticed that a lot of our participants are dealing with at this point. Social isolation was a big one as well. It was prevalent prior to the pandemic, and even more so prevalent during the pandemic.
And when we talk about isolation, obviously a huge need that a lot of people are trying to overcome due to COVID. Talk to us about how you were able to really sustain during that time, because overcoming isolation was one of the things that I hear a lot of organizations saying that they had to spend time with their constituents in terms of trying to deal with. How were you able to roll out services?
Well, when the pandemic came, you're right, we were at a loss of how we're going to provide these services that were very crucial to our LGBT older adults. And so a lot of calls, we constantly made wellness calls. We made thousands of wellness calls throughout the week. We had case management involved in that process. All the staffs were dedicated into that process. We worked with the Department for the Aging to make sure that home meals were delivered to their home. Many of our participants used to come to our center to have our daily lunch. And for many of our participants, that may have been the only meal that they received. And so we found it to be real crucial to make sure that they had some meals delivered to their homes. We had called local pharmacy to make sure that they had home delivery for their medication. We had worked with local pantries to see if they can deliver some of their pantry items to their homes. We also created a whole virtual world where we were providing services and activities and events in the virtual platform. And so, we still continue providing art programming, exercise program, nutrition classes, and even special events on the screen so that they can come together and address some of the isolation issues that are very prevalent in our LGBT community.
Walk me through this, because I know that a lot of the work that you do also stems to dealing with public policy, really advocating on behalf of your constituents. For somebody that may not be so familiar, what are some of the things that maybe we're not privy to that your constituents are dealing with that you would like to see addressed?
Right now, as my memory recall, there's still 28 states that don't have protection for LGBT elders and just the LGBT community. And so we have an advocacy arm in SAGE, at SAGE, and we're constantly addressing those issues through Washington, through Albany. We work with our participants to at least solicit information and to also gather knowledge around what their needs are, so that we can bring those information up so that can be addressed either in Washington or in Albany.
When we talk about Albany, obviously a lot of people are paying attention to what goes on in the state and state protections. Have you been successful in at least being able to get the ears of elected officials to make them sensitive and also proactive in dealing with this?
We've been very lucky to have many of our local politicians to be really part of our vision and our mission to provide a healthy and active lifestyle for our older adults. And so we've we've been very successful being on the table so that we can share what we know about our population and the needs that are in our population.
And with that population, I know that prior to COVID, we talked about prior to COVID, some things that were going on.
Yeah.
And one of those things that were going on was food insecurity. It was happening before COVID, during COVID, and as we're navigating out of it. But talk to us, because I know that you've done a good job in terms of providing meals for older adults as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Many of our participants used to come to our center to receive their daily meals. We also had pantries that they were a big part of coming in and receiving 40 pounds of pantry. And when the pandemic happened, that stopped for a bit. But we really worked a lot with our local pantry distributors and agencies that work closely with us, like New York Pantry. And we were able to identify areas that they can go to get their pantry, and as well as have some of those pantry delivered to them. A lot of the time, we had staff and volunteer, and even participants who chipped in to deliver some of that pantry to folks that weren't able to come out or were afraid to come out. A lot of our participants have some ailments or, as part of the aging process, lack mobility. And so, we found that many of our participants didn't even want to go out or wasn't able to go out. But we were able to work around that with volunteers, with interns, with the staff themselves to go and deliver those items that are most needed.
And sticking along those lines, I want you to do me a favor and share a little bit, because you have something that's pretty unique. It's called the Cyber Cafe. And for those who don't know about the Cyber Cafe, why don't you share?
Yeah, so we have 15 computers in this room that we call Cyber Cafe. And I think it's been huge. I think prior to the pandemic, there's always been a resistance to technology with many of our older folks. And we noticed there was such a big digital divide during the pandemic. And so now participants come to our Cyber Cafe to utilize it to make doctor appointment. Now telehealth is big. And so many of them use the Cyber Cafe to make appointments or to be at an appointment, dusting of their resume, and even connecting with their family members. The computer and the internet was very crucial for us to stay connected during the pandemic. And it continues to be so. And our computer room our Cyber Cafe has been hugely attended and utilized.
So I know that nowadays, in particular New York City, and you're located in the borough of the Bronx, that there's a lot of talk about affordable housing, being able to really be in an affordable place, and skyrocketing rents, and economic downturn seems to affect a lot of people. When it comes to yourself and your organization, how are you addressing the issue of housing services for your constituents?
Well, we have worked in collaboration here in the Bronx with Help USA to provide 83 units of LGBT-friendly housing. And so that has been one. We also opened up another housing development over in Brooklyn. And so we've been addressing not just in form of advocacy with the state and the federal government, but we also have been implementing some these housing projects that have found its way to the Bronx and in Brooklyn. We also have tenant coordinators that help the participants to acclimate into their new home. We just gotten a housing specialist now that is working with the community around affordable housing and housing needs. That has been crucial. When we opened our door, one of the biggest issues that we had were people looking for housing and affordable housing. And although we were just focusing on those that were living at our 775 Crotona Park North, we now have the ability to work around those needs with our housing specialists.
So as we look forward to the future, obviously a lot of pending needs within the community. We talk about housing and really making sure that people are having that stable need. What are some of the things that you're hearing from your constituents in terms of immediate needs right now?
Yeah, right now is help with their rent. a lot of our participants, I would say, that does attend the Bronx, 90% of them are the poverty line. And so, and understandably so, right? LGBT older adults are twice as likely to live alone and be single. They're also 4 times less likely to have children. And so they don't have like the economic help and security that their counterparts may have. And so, so a lot of the needs are looking for housing, looking where to find that. So there's a lack of knowledge of where to kind of navigate that process. And so having a housing specialist here, having staff that are knowledgeable around the housing community has been very helpful to address some of those needs.
So when we talk about providing services, obviously, I know that you guys do case management and really trying to do wraparound services for your constituents. Are you finding that more recently that your numbers are rising in terms of needs, or are things pretty much at a level playing field right now?
No, the needs have shifted, right? The trends have shifted, and so we're finding that more of our participants are looking for more transportation and how to navigate, access a ride. We pantry and food issues that are dealing with food insecurity has risen. And so we're dealing with some of the, and housing again has always been sort of like that that common thread through a lot of our participants when they come into our doors.
You do have support groups, and I'm aware of that. Are you finding that people are finding that safe place and being able to share some of their challenges, some of their struggles? Because when we talk about the whole isolation issue, the greatest challenge, I think, is really having somebody to talk to.
Absolutely. We have various support groups. We have the Latino Gay Men's Group that we have here. We have the L Group, which is our lesbian identified support group. And other LGBT specific programming that runs out of this building. And we also have a lot of special events. We just had like a couple of weeks, our Mother's Day celebration, where we had a performer come in and had a special lunch. We celebrated Honor Your LGBTQ Elders, where the commissioner of DIFTA came by, spoke to us and said a few words. And it was a time to honor and celebrate our LGBT elders. Sometimes we forget they were, a lot of our elders that come here were living during maybe one of the darkest and ugliest time in regards to homophobia back in the 60s and 70s. Many of them lost their jobs, many of them were beat up, many of them were able to come out. And so they really paved the road for this generation that we have now. And we need to celebrate them. You know, they took care of us, and it's time for us to take care.
Yeah, you used the term homophobia, and I know that's still prevalent in our society. Do you think that things are getting better when it comes to dealing with that? Because as we know, when you talked about originally starting, there was that stigma and the stereotype. But where do you see things right now?
I think, you know, we always go back and forth with things that have gotten better. It's a different generation. You know, we do have an intergenerational program here. So we have LGBT youth helping us on our day-to-day. And so it's always great to hear some of the discussion. You know, we're living in a time that you do have LGBT student alliances in high school where you may not have found that back in the 80s and 70s and 60s. And so although there have been areas that have improved, we're still seeing homophobia, although it's covert, right? And so recently in the news, you've been hearing LGBT rights being attacked, which is which we've been having a lot of discussion in space around. And our participants are very resilient, and so they lived through those ugly times of homophobia back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They lived through the HIV/AIDS epidemic. They lived through 9/11. Now they're living through pandemic. And so they know how to fight in regards to surviving and addressing their needs.
Yeah. Jose, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us, brother. I think it's been a good conversation and making people aware of the work that SAGE is doing. Continue to keep your boots on the ground. And thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you for your support, Daren.
All righty. Jose Collazo, our guest here on the Social Justice Forum.